Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Gemology for Schmucks. My name is Peter Nelson, and I'm here to guide you in everything you need to know about gemstones. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the odd men out in the gem world. That is opal. Now, why do I say odd men out? Because most gems are a mineral. And a mineral is an inorganic substance that has a definite chemical composition and an orderly and repeating crystalline structure. Opal ain't that. Opal does have a definite chemical composition, but it does not have an orderly and repeating crystalline structure. Opal is actually made up of silica gel spheres. And the interesting thing about the formation of opal is basically when the rains came down on mountains in various parts of the world, they would pick up certain mineral components, and those would get dissolved, kind of like when you put sugar or salt into water and you stir it up and it disappears, it just dissolves in there. Different types of minerals and chemicals can do that. Now, when this weird chemical soup gets complicated enough, it can actually dissolve silica from different types of stones. And eventually, that chemical soup containing the silica will find its way down into different crevices at the bottom of ancient oceans. And there, the silica will eventually, as the oceans start to evaporate, turn into a gel. And over time, large amounts of time, that silica gel will settle together. And it can do that in nooks and crannies in between stones, which is what we see most of the time in opal deposits, but it can also do it in things like the bones of maybe dinosaurs and whatnot, or trees. You will also find opalized trees and things like this, or opalized bones. Those are very interesting, very rare specimens. Most of the time we find opal veins inside of the crevices of ancient rocks, at the bottom of ancient oceans. So you can get the idea that this took a long time. So these silica gel spheres have to line up together in order to form what we know of as opal. Now, opal is not a mineral because it does not have an orderly crystalline structure. These gel spheres basically just mass together and they fuse over time as the opal dries out. So when you test opal using a polariscope, which I talked about in this video, you will get a similar reaction that you would get from something like glass or amber, because neither of these have a crystalline structure. So before we go any further, let me tell you about some of the different types of opal. Opal is not always like this white one that everybody has heard about. This is what we call precious opal, where it has the play of color effect. Precious opal has to have the play of color effect, otherwise it's not considered precious opal. Which is kind of strange to me because there are some other varieties of opal that are also quite valuable that do not have the play of color effect. Fire opal, for example, does not always have, often does not have, the play of color effect. There are also some translucent pieces of opal that are very interesting and rare specimens that can fetch a high price, but they do not have the play of color effect. So we have precious opal, and then we have something called common opal, or sometimes in Australia they call it potch. Most of the time potch is just the white color of opal, but it can also come in a variety of different colors, like this right here, this bluish green. It can also come in some neon colors similar to Paraiba, but it's still opal. Fire opal is, of course, going to be the reddish color of opal. This one actually does have play of color effect, but many of the fire opal pieces do not have the play of color effect. They're sold simply because of the striking, super deep, super bold orange color. And then we also have something called boulder opal. Boulder opal is this right here, where it is a mother rock and there are veins of opal inside of it. It's called boulder opal because it's still attached to the boulder that it came from. Surprise, surprise. Boulder opal is a very interesting specimen because it shows you the origins, where opal comes from and how opal formed. If you just have a slice of opal, it's very easy to have no idea where it came from. But this right here is proof in the pudding. Pudding in the proof. Remember that the formation of opals comes because of the solution of silica inside of water, and opals are formed as that dries out. So the water content of Australian opals tends to be less than many other origins. Now, why is that important? One thing that is very common with opals that you have to be cautious about is how quickly opals dry out or don't. As with pearls, you need to keep a certain amount of humidity around opals. That does not mean you put your opals in water. That's not a good idea. That can actually harm certain opals. But generally, wearing your opals and washing your hands and all of these things, you can keep enough general moisture in the opals to keep that play of color alive. Same thing with pearls. You wouldn't want to take your pearls and just put them in a safety deposit box and forget about them for a few years. Without a certain amount of humidity, they will actually degrade in quality. So it's important to wear them every once in a while. Oh darn! So the three types of opals that we are talking about are common opals, and those are the ones without the play of color effect, precious opal, which does have the play of color effect, and then boulder opals, which is the play of color opal inside of the mother rock, typically in veins. Many of the other names that come along with opal, like crystal opal and harlequin opal and blah, 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 come from the patterns of the play of color that are on the opal itself. So how do I know what is a high value opal compared to a low value opal? When we're talking about common opals, the most important thing, of course, is going to be the body color because it does not have the play of color effect. If it's a nice neon color or a very bright orange fire opal, those are going to be a higher value than a cloudy and dimly colored opal. So if it's more brown instead of orange, that's going to be less valuable than a pure orange, bright, lively fire opal. A kind of faint blue as opposed to a neon blue is going to be a very different price point as well, and that's in common opal. With precious opal, the play of color is very important. How much of the face of the stone has the play of color effect? Some opals, it's only until you tip the cabochon over to here that you get some play of color on this side. We don't like that. We want as much play of color as we can get over all of the stone. At least the face of the stone that you would see once the stone is set. The next thing after how much of the face of the stone is covered with the play of color effect is what colors are in the play of color. The most high value is going to be if there is a good mixture of colors, not just one or two. So if you have an opal that has the play of color phenomenon, a precious opal, and it has just green dancing across the surface, that's going to be a lower price point than one that has multiple colors like green and blue and red and purple. You can have the entire spectrum of the rainbow here. If you're limited to just one color and we're going to compare those, then red is going to be the highest value point. But as I said before, a good mixture of all of those colors across the surface of the stone is going to get you the highest still. So what about fakes? Are there any fakes for opals? And the answer is absolutely. There are many, many simulants, and even there is a synthetic opal, a true synthetic. Now, just as a reminder, the definition of a synthetic is something that is chemically and structurally the same as the gemstone. And in this case, we do have a true opal synthetic on the market now, and they can make it any color they want. The process of making this synthetic opal is very similar to the process used in nature. They get dissolved silica and they give it a long time. To my understanding, it takes about a year to make it, and it comes in a brick. You'll see a brick of opal. And they have to give it this year in order for the silica gel spheres to settle together in the right order to get a nice play of color. If they try and rush it and those silica gel spheres don't line up in the correct order in order to create that play of color effect, you just get ugly common opal. Some common opal is beautiful, but if we're going to be talking about synthetic, then it sure better have that play of color, in my opinion. So aside from the true synthetic, there are also a few simulants. Simulants being things that look like the stone that they're impersonating but have absolutely no relation to it aside from its appearance. There are glass and plastic imitations of opals, and in my opinion, the most convincing simulants are the plastic imitations. Opal is very light, it has a very low density or specific gravity, but plastic has an even lighter density still. So one thing, when I was going through my gemological training at AIGS, I found that there were a few pieces of simulated opal that were made out of plastic that actually would float in the water. They wouldn't even sink. Bizarre. So I'm not saying that's definitive proof that this is a simulated opal if it floats, but it's a pretty good indicator. And we have one more that is not a simulant, but it is definitely something to be aware of as far as the price point of the opal. There is something called an opal doublet, which is a thin slice of opal, and that is attached to another piece of stone. It could be either mother rock sandstone that is separately glued to the stone, that's not naturally occurring, or it could be another piece of black chalcedony. And those are glued together to give the opal additional strength and also give some more body to the stone to make it more usable in jewelry. Opal doublets exist because oftentimes opal exists in a thin vein that has found its way into the crack of some stones. And so when they get that thin layer that has play of color out, they have to put it with something else in order to give enough strength. That way it can be more usable and functional in jewelry. And you would want to go on and test it further. If you'd like to see a variety of opals that are in stock, you can check out Nazo Anna's channel over here with sizes, dimensions, and prices, and you can let me know if there's something that you're interested in. Alright everybody, thank you for watching. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, tell all of your friends about it, and until next time, I'll say bye-bye.